I'm not conventionally pretty, nor classically pretty. I'm the Duffy in any friend group I'm in. I never worried about being hit on, disrespected, or kidnapped. I never had to worry about my own safety when going out, as I was never the one anyone wanted to get to know or be around because I'm really plain, and it's always me that had to be on the lookout for my friends, male and female alike. Now, I like to go to a local bar, almost daily. I don't drink alcohol there. I just get a normal Coke and wait for my ride home. It's my usual hangout spot after work, so I just sit and chill and mind my own business. Well, a few weeks ago, I had just gotten off work and was chilling at my usual spot, sipping on my drink, while working on a new pendant I was making. I didn't think anyone would try to talk to me since I knew I basically blended into the walls, even though the staff know me and pay me slight attention and are nice to me. But this weird guy I'd never seen before came over and sat at my table across from me. I was surprised and looked up at him and struck up a small conversation that I can't even remember how it started, but he started to ask me a few questions about myself that I thought were normal and all flowed together, so I didn't think much of it. I had drunk 3 glasses of soda by then and had to use the restroom, so I grabbed my phone and purse and went into the bathroom. I went back a few minutes later and went back to working, since none of my stuff had been touched. I called over a waitress and asked her for a new drink, and she nodded as it had always been ingrained to me that you never leave your drink unattended, and if you do, you just have it remade or leave it to the bartender. As she was going to grab for my old drink, which only had a few sips taken out of it, the guy got a bit huffy at me, saying I was being wasteful for just ordering a new drink. I looked at him with a raised eyebrow in confusion. I asked him why it was his business if I did. It was my money after all, and the refills were free. He then said I was making more work for the waitress for no reason. This annoyed me, and I told him again that it was my business and that if he didn't like it, he could always leave. He then tried to wave the waitress over by letting her change my drink, but I'd had enough of his nonsense and told him flat out, "Then you drink it if you think it's such a waste." It seemed to have caught him off guard, and he looked at me shocked, then a bit angry before leaving. I then looked at the drink and handed it to the waitress and told her that something didn't feel right about the guy that I was talking to, and if she could tell the bartender to keep an eye on him and dump out my drink and just bring me water from then on. I left for home after being picked up shortly after, and found out the next day after work that he had been arrested for assault. I didn't find out till today what exactly happened. Apparently, he had gotten into a fight with the bartender working that night. The bartender caught him putting something into a girl's drink when she wasn't looking, and he stopped her from drinking it. The guy got mad and it started a whole fight. The cops were called and now he's awaiting trial. Apparently, he was trying to see if he could get someone like me who always had her guard down for herself because my confidence was low. He thought I'd be an easy mark with just a little attention, but when I didn't just drink my drink when I came back, he had to try on another girl. When I was 19, I really got into clubbing. I went almost every other day. My younger friend, who I had known in high school, was turning 18. On Wednesday, she asked me to take her since I was already well versed in the club scene at this point and knew how to stay safe and have fun. The bar we went to just so happened to be my favorite bar's throwback night. They played 1990s to 2000s movies, and it always attracted a ton of people because the drinks were cheap and the music was good. When I met up with my friend, we drove to the bar about an hour earlier than we intended to go in so we could sit in my car and drink. We had a good time, and I had a few seltzers since I had to drive us home and be sober in 3 hours. While we were sitting in my car, which was parked across the street from the bar, I told her I had a few rules for a safe clubbing experience. Number 1, no taking drinks from strangers. Number 2, no going to the bathroom alone, as I've noticed creepy men always target girls who are alone. And number 3, neither of us were going to go home with anybody. We went in and had a good time. I met up with a guy I had recently been seeing. We danced and talked to people, and she had a few drinks. Once it hit 2 a.m., they started closing and kicked everyone out. She started talking to a guy she met at the bar, got his number, and we started to leave. As we were walking towards the crosswalk, a man started walking behind us and tried to talk to my friend who was visibly drunk. I turned around and told him to leave us alone because she had just turned 18, and he looked like he was in his late 20s or early 30s and also not drunk. He kept talking to my friend, and she continued entertaining him. He followed us back to my car and then began to ask us for a ride. I told him no, and he continued to beg, and even began to tell me he'll pay me. I told him to just pay for an Uber and leave us alone. He still didn't leave and kept pestering me. At this point, I wanted to leave because he was creeping me out and even started creeping out my friend. I unlocked the driver's side door and put my stuff in while still telling him to leave. I unlocked the passenger door, which unlocks all the doors, and I told my friend to get in the car. He then proceeded to completely change his demeanor and said, "Oh, thanks," and got in my back seat. I started screaming at him, telling him to get out of my car, and he steadfastly refused and even started becoming aggressive. At this point, I wanted to call the cops, so I asked my friend for her phone since mine was on the fritz and not letting me make calls, and she told me that her phone wasn't working either. I started glancing around to see if I could spot a police officer anywhere, since we were across the street from the police station. There was not one in sight. I started panicking. Then I saw the guy that I met up with that night getting into his Uber. I ran over to him quickly and told him there was a man in my car who wouldn't get out and that our phones weren't working. He told his friends in the Uber to wait for him and walked back to my car with me. He started yelling at the man to get out of my car, and the man started yelling back while threatening to beat him up. He eventually got out to try and fight him. The second he got out of my car, I told my friend to get in. I locked the doors while the man followed him back to his Uber, threatening to punch him in the head. He got in his Uber and they drove away, and so did we, and the man was left standing in the road looking very angry. The next morning, I spoke to my mom, who was a prosecutor for 20 years. She told me that she tried a case where 2 girls my age gave a guy a ride home from the bar, and he raped and murdered both of them. I didn't go clubbing for a while after that. This happened about 15 years ago. I was 21 years old and living in my very first apartment. It was a small bachelor apartment in a sketchy area. I grew up in a town that was known to be rough and tough, but I knew how to handle myself and learned at a young age to keep my head down and not to go looking for trouble. My apartment building was behind a bar. A lot of the customers of the bar would stand outside to smoke. When they stood outside, they would be looking at my apartment. Most of the people who were out smoking kept to themselves. A few would nod and say hello if I passed by. There were never any issues, until one evening, when I came home from work. I passed the bar and saw this extremely tall man outside smoking. As I passed, he stared at me. I gave him a slight nod, but he didn't acknowledge me. He just continued to stare. It made me uncomfortable, but I didn't think much of it. About an hour later, I heard a knock on my door. It was odd because you have to buzz people into the building. The building only had 8 units, and I didn't really know any of the neighbors. I froze because I really didn't want to talk to anyone, but the knocking continued. I finally shouted out, but there was no response. I shouted again, "Who's there?" And the voice said, "It's Tom." I didn't know anyone named Tom, so I shouted back, "I don't know anyone named Tom. You must have the wrong apartment." The voice said, "You may not know me, but I know you. Open up so we can talk." I went over to the people, and it was the tall dude from the bar. I loudly said, "Leave now or I'm calling the cops." I heard his footsteps walk away and heard the building door open and then close. He was gone, or so I thought. A few minutes later, I peeked out the window, and he was standing in the parking lot. He seemed to be talking to himself. At this point, I was freaking out. I called my landlord, who lived in the building next to me. He told me to call the police, and that in the meantime, him and his brother would come and check things out. I called the police and told them what was going on. They said a car was on the way. Meanwhile, my landlord and his brother made their way to the parking lot. I watched out my window and saw them approach him. The guy took one look at them and bolted. My landlord and his brother tried to chase him, but he got away. About 5 minutes later, the police arrived. I gave my version of events and also a description of the man. The officer stared at me and said, "We've had reports of a man matching that description who's been sexually assaulting women. Thank God you didn't open the door." A few days later, I got a call from the officer. He told me part of their investigation was talking to the owner of the bar. The owner called the police when the guy reappeared after a few days, and the police responded and arrested him.